Judith, thank you so much for the introduction. Let me share first of all, it's a pleasure to meet all of you, and it's been lovely to hear where you're from and your relationship to UCLA. I'm an East Coast girl, and so I could never have imagined that I would end up on the West Coast, but landing at UCLA, finding my way to UCLA has finally felt like home to me. So it's lovely to be here, and I am excited to hear your thoughts and comments on the presentation. Let me A, find it, and B, share my screen. Okay. Okay. Terrific. Can everyone see my screen? Yes, thumbs up. Okay, wonderful. I've had several meetings, and by several, about 15 of them, and I'm also teaching, and last quarter and this quarter, and every time I try to share my screen, a different kind of presentation, the only ones that come up are the slides, my lecture slides. So, I'm glad that didn't happen this time. So what we want to talk about today is really the promise of precision health. I have been at UCLA, it will be 5 years this June, and it feels like I've been here forever. I did my undergraduate work at Tufts, and I was pre-med, psychology and biology, and then I took gap years before gap years were fashionable. And we're talking a long, long time ago. And I did that because I was working with the Biological Program Project on Schizophrenia, which was a federally funded project at Harvard Medical School. Around that time, I was really interested in psychiatric genetics, schizophrenia, depression, bipolar disorder. And so when just before graduation, they offered me a position to support the project in in myriad ways, but namely looking at eye movements as biomarkers for mental illness, specifically schizophrenia. So I took in total about 3 years off. I took my MCATs and my GREs at the same time, and when the chair of the psych department at Harvard said to me, you know, Clara, I really think you should think about graduate school. You know, I thought, you know, perhaps let's keep my options open. And so it ends up that that he was very gracious in wanting to bring me in as a graduate student. But then there was a program at Washington University in St. Louis, and I started my westward migration. After graduate school, I did a clinical postdoc here. It's what brought me out to Los Angeles, in the Angeles National Forest. I lived in the Valley, in so many different areas of the Valley, and worked with children and adolescents at risk with severe emotional and behavioral disorders. And that was in partnership with the UCLA Trauma Psychiatry Service. So I really began my affiliation with UCLA in the early 2000s. So I feel like it has been 21 years since I've been working with UCLA, even though formally I took my path sort of was not a direct path to UCLA, but it certainly got me in the right place. So when Dan Geschwin, who's the Associate Vice Chancellor for Precision Health at UCLA, he and I had worked together for close to 20 years in autism. When he recruited me to UCLA, it was really to think about, you know, the Institute as a startup. He and I are very similarly minded, really thinking about innovation and how we can accelerate the pace of biomedical research to really support the needs of patients. And so this was really right up my alley, and the two of us the opportunity to partner together was really what sold me. He is a very brilliant man, and he also has, he's a neurologist, but mostly a neurogenetic, mostly he's a researcher, an incredible researcher, but really someone that also supports believes in translational medicine and the power that the basic science and the clinical science have to work together to transform medicine. So when I think about precision health, when I was first talking with Dan, I never really quite understood what precision health was. Precision health, personalized medicine, but really when actually Joe Biden, when before he was president, and he led the Cancer Moonshot program, when he talked about delivering the right treatment to the right person at the right time, that made sense to me. And precision, what's inherent about precision health and medicine is this inclusion of genomic information, your own biological information, as an additional part of the treatment process. So if we're going to customize or tailor or orient treatments that are going to perhaps work the first time around, or maybe the second time around, then we need to know a little bit about you to do it, a little bit more about your biology to do that. So in that sense, we are thinking about healthcare that's really tailored to you. And all of these are big old buzzwords, but what does it really mean? So I look up and down the folks on the call, and many of us are wearing glasses or hiding behind contacts. And really, when we think about something as simplistic as glasses, I am way beyond the days of cheaters where you'd go to the pharmacy and pick up a pair of glasses and put them on, right? Most of us wouldn't wear just any pair of glasses. Our prescription is tailored to our vision. So if you take something that we take for granted, going to the eye doctor, they measure your, test your eyes, blah, blah, blah. When we think about the possibility that we can take that, the lesson from ophthalmology, and extend that to other aspects of healthcare, it really can be transformative. And, Dr. Greg Fonarow, who is, he's in cardiovascular medicine, he said it would be impossible to come up with more than 300 million unique pairs of shoes to perfectly fit everyone in the US. But offering small, medium, and large wouldn't work either. So how do we think about those little gradations that can, whether it's in an intervention, whether it's treatment, whether it's prevention, how can we think about that as a package in such a way that I can say at the end of the day, wow, thank you, doctor, that medication that you gave me actually worked. It actually felt like it was maximally beneficial for me, as opposed to this one size fits all, where it may work, it may not work, understanding that medicine is an inexact science. But even within that, all of that variability, I think that there's always the goal, and it is the goal of the physician, to try to get as close to something that might work for you as possible. When we think of genetics, because genetics is a huge part of this ecosystem, I think about adding genetics becomes almost like an additional lab value. So in the physician toolbox, if you had, genetics in that toolbox, then genetics can open up many, many, many more avenues to consider when you're thinking about medications, treatments, and other types of therapeutics. Well, there are 4 P's of personalized medicine, and this is really well known. And what we're trying to do at UCLA is really ensure that we're incorporating all of these into our definition of precision health and medicine. It's predictive. So, and I have a slide a little bit later on about breast cancer, but is there an opportunity? Can understanding your genetic background help us predict certain types of risks for illness, certain treatment responses, or outcomes, health outcomes? It's personalized. So ideally, we would want to personalize all of the above to your genetic and biological makeup. Now, I'll tell you, it's really interesting, but over 99% of our DNA among all of us in this room is the same. So it's less than 1% that makes each of us unique. And that less than 1% of difference is what really, it can explain risk for disease, certain diseases. It can predict, obviously it includes things like your hair color, your eye color, what we call a phenotype, but it also can include risk for certain illnesses and environmental responses. So really thinking about how your genetic and biological makeup can be a part of this is important. It's preventative. Early intervention. In the autism world, we know this. This is our credo. Early intervention. The earlier you can identify an individual, a child in this case, who might be at risk, the earlier you can intervene, and the sooner you can perhaps help that child get back on track with developmental milestones. But prevention also, it affects all of us. And especially as we age, it's even more important to understand that. And then lastly, it's participatory. So, and I think medicine has shifted in this direction for the most part, involving the patient and the care team together to make a lot of treatment decisions, as opposed to, and in some cases, family members where it's relevant. So it's participatory. It's not just the physician telling you, this is what you need to do, or this is what I think you need to do. It opens up the door to more of a conversation with all members of your care team. So I've just talked about the importance of genetics and the importance of genetics in terms of the propensity for, or the risk for certain diseases. But really, it's not just the genes. About 30% of disease actually is explained by genetics. So there's a lot out there that genetics doesn't explain. And when we think about your things like lifestyle, are you active? Are you sedentary? Do you smoke? Do you drink? Do you exercise? A lot of these other environmental factors can really, really influence your state of health. So there are family history is also a big part of this. So for many people, family history can drive a lot of treatment decisions. And so while some things are out of your control, a lot of people feel, well, it's genetic. It's not within my control. Well, genetics is only a part of it. It's all these other factors together that's going to create a much more complete picture of health. Now we're moving into, all of you have heard about big data, and we hear about a hack a day, and sadly the UC, the University of California, was hacked very recently. We're getting constant barrage of emails about that right now. So this notion of big data, and especially as it pertains to healthcare now, it can be a little scary. But there is a big data revolution in healthcare, and this revolution is actually in our best interest. When we think about, we all subscribe to either a Netflix or an Amazon or Hulu or one of these large either streaming services, or Amazon because you use it to buy things, or Instacart, whatever the case might be. Early on, it was remarkable that as soon as I started interacting with these different services, they started sort of interacting with me, saying, hey, Clara, based on the movie you watched, we think you might like this. Or in Amazon, based on your shopping pattern, we think you might be interested in this. Or other people that bought this also bought that. These data aggregators, they're always behind the scenes, and they have developed these machine learning algorithms that are really looking for patterns in behavior, in your behavior as a consumer. And it's not that it's so much about Big Brother. It's about trying to learn your patterns, your behaviors, so that they can make money off of that and they can leverage that. So they know what content might be appealing to you. Well, now we're starting to apply that to healthcare. So thinking about, there is a treasure trove of information in your electronic health record. Many of us have probably have data that are not in our health record, but when you start to aggregate all of those data, then and you start applying the same principles, then you can really start to see, wow, patterns begin to emerge. So people like you benefit from treatments like this. You might be in the group of people who doesn't really respond to medications very well. Well, among a large enough group of people similar to you, we can start studying a little bit more about you so that we can start thinking about or looking for certain things and patterns of data that could help actually identify potential treatment options. That's a very simplistic way of looking at it. But when you think here, it's imaging, it's your lab values, medications that you're on, medications you've done well on, medications that you haven't done so well on. When you start thinking about, take all of this together, all of a sudden patterns begin to emerge. So precision health, as we're operationalizing this, it's really an approach. So a lot of people say, well, precision health, is that a department? Is that no, it's not necessarily a tangible thing. It is an approach. It's a frame of reference. And part of that approach is this integration of information about your genes, about your lifestyle, and your environment. So on the left here, we see genomics, and we know that our genes can suggest what diseases we might be predisposed to. It's an incomplete picture of health. Now, genetics is about statistics, and statistics is all about numbers. So you're looking for, in order for a lot of genetic findings to be meaningful, you need to look across a large number of people. Unless you're looking for a single gene disorder that could be at the heart of your particular, and then that's just a different story. But again, genetic risk, right? We're talking about a probability. So it's not you have it, you don't. In some cases it is. But oftentimes, for example, there are companies like 23andMe who might say, oh, you're at increased risk for X, Y, or Z based on some of these genetic findings. Okay. So again, it's about what we might be predisposed to. Now on the right, we've already talked over it's the last 10 minutes at least about all of these other factors that can influence our metabolic state or a state of health. You put them together, and that's what we call a phenotype. Okay, so it's a snapshot of health, of your health at a given time. Now, because of technology, we are really at the beginning of what has become an explosion of genetic discoveries across populations. So if we put this in context, in 2001, it cost $100 million to sequence the human genome. $100 million. I can get your whole genome sequence now for less than 1,000. So when you think about it in that way, all of a sudden it's supply and demand. The technology is there, the cost is coming down, and now more people can benefit from technology that was once reserved for researchers or billionaires who had a flight of fancy. The more we can bring this closer to us, now it opens up a whole new world to give us a better understanding of human disease. Now, just because you can doesn't mean the insurance companies are going to say, hey, that's awesome. Let's do this on everybody, right? Again, there is a financial model to all of this. And when you think about having your genome sequenced, there's lots of ways to do that. If you're looking at, every single base pair in your genome, 3+ billion, that's called whole genome sequencing. That's not yet a clinically validated test. It's close. It's really, really close. In fact, a lot of children's hospitals are starting to make that their standard of care, because especially when you have high-risk babies, and you're trying to find the cause of their disease, especially in NICUs and PICUs, then they're ordering a whole genome and to try to understand what's there. Most of the time, and this is a clinically validated test, physicians might want to order a whole exome sequencing. That is only looking at the parts of your genome that code for proteins. And why would you do that? Well, it's because that's where most common disease will be found, right? Not rare diseases, but common diseases. And so you'll be able to identify them much more quickly, much more cheaply. And then for things like cancer or, certain metabolic conditions, there are panels that are targeted. So instead of looking across the entire genome at all of the exomes, that the mutations of interest that are relevant to this disease are about 11, and you just put them on a chip and then you target them. So it's called targeted sequencing. So each of those comes with its own cost model. But the point here is that as the costs come down across the board, it becomes more accessible to us as consumers. Now, molecular profiling or genetics, it's used oftentimes to determine appropriate therapies. Now, many of us, and here in this illustration, the folks on the top, they all have the same diagnosis, but the different colors mean that they have different responses to treatment. We're all different. And so what you can see is in our one-size-fits-all approach in medicine, if you all have the same diagnosis, well, let's just start you off with the same treatment. As then all of a sudden, some people benefit. So the people in blue, they benefit from traditional therapy, but the people in green might need targeted therapy. Okay. A different kind of therapy, a tweaked therapy, a different formulation of something, whatever it is, but they will benefit from something slightly different, but it's different from the usual. And then those in orange, they're going to benefit from an alternative therapy entirely, a different dose. So again, if all things are equal and we all have diabetes, as an example, the kinds of medications that might be prescribed to us may be different based on our genetic background. Your genes specifically can influence the medications that are right for you. Now, for me, and I use this example a lot, when I'm in pain, I took a little spill on my bike, not this weekend, but last weekend, and I immediately reached for the Advil. That's what's going to help me. Other people immediately said, "Oh my gosh, where's your Aleve?" Well, Aleve doesn't work for me, and not at all. And then other people at urgent care said, "Would you like some Tylenol?" And I said, "No, thanks. I'll take a pass on that because I know that my Advil is like within reach, right?" So our genetics determines our responses to these kinds of medications. So here we see that most drugs prescribed in the US are effective in less than 60% of treated patients. And when we think about, my God, how many different drugs are available, it then becomes, it's pretty remarkable when you think about, wow, I'm taking this medication, but the likelihood that it'll work for me is low. Well, now what's wrong with that is that now you're subject to side effects. You're taking a drug that you perhaps shouldn't be taking. It could be benign, but it could also be deleterious. So knowing that is very important before you subject yourself to it. So in this example, we have 4 different people. They all have the same illness. Again, the first one responds to a normal dose of a medication. We can perhaps call it an antibiotic. The second one responds to a lower dose. The third one needs a double hit of whatever antibiotic it is. And the last one needs something completely different. And maybe an antibiotic is, because it's so overly prescribed, is not the right example here. Perhaps it's pain medication. But the bottom line is that, oftentimes my mother, who recently passed, when she was very sensitive to medication, and the physician would say, have her take X of this. And I would say, well, what if I just start her off with one? And he's like, but that's not the therapeutic dose. But knowing my mother, I knew that she may not need the therapeutic dose to feel the same effect. So her therapeutic dose could be much less. And more often than not, starting her off with half of something, it really did the trick. Because, and it depends on the medication. Sometimes you need to actually stick to that dosing and the dosing regimen, because otherwise you could do more harm than good. But especially with pain medication, she wouldn't need all of it. And if she had it, she would be so viciously ill that then she wouldn't want to take it any longer, right? So thinking about how, and all of us just do this naturally. We know our bodies, and we know what's going to help us. Always follow a doctor's advice and have these conversations with a physician. I mean, that's typically where I stand on this. I don't want to be making up the rules as I go along, but I do know my body. So when we think about standard drug treatments and how they're effective in less than 60% of patients, what you can see in this slide is that on the right side, these little bars sort of speak to the effect size, or how clinically meaningful is the effect. And so the farther to the right, the more clinically meaningful. And so we see here things like proton pump for reflux. So if any of us have reflux, those medications really they are pretty effective. Oxycodone and for pain relief, pretty effective. As we start moving down this list, we start looking at antipsychotics, may not be as effective as we might think. Antidepressants, wow, there are lots of them, not very effective. And statins for cholesterol lowering, gosh, not really effective at all. So, and again, it's all relative. If we take this one size fits all approach, this is what we're going to see. If we did this for you as an individual, it may look very different. Understanding the genetic drivers that cause cancer is also an area where precision medicine has already had a profound effect. In fact, cancer is where precision medicine is most advanced. Here we have two patients, in this case, they're children. They both have the same illness. Both of them however, they may have the same kind of cancer, but the mutations that are causing those tumors are different from each other. If we were to give them a standard treatment to both of them, maybe one of them would respond, maybe neither would respond. If we start targeting drugs instead of to the kind of cancer, and more specifically targeting them to the specific mutation, that's a way, and we've demonstrated, researchers are demonstrating this over and over again, that is how you start to personalize treatments. And we already see this in the breast cancer world. Shifting gears, I've been talking a lot more about common diseases, diabetes, risk for cardiovascular events. Rare diseases are diseases, they're defined by the fact that they affect less than 200,000 people in the nation. 80% of rare diseases are genetically based. So that's huge. Sadly, only 5% have treatments. 35% are responsible, or rare diseases rather, are responsible for 35% of deaths in the first year of life. So getting back to those NICUs, 50% of those affected with a rare disease are children. And this number has gone up significantly since this paper in 2016, but there are over 7,000 rare diseases and less than 400 FDA approved treatments. So this is really significant. And having worked in autism, I know how hard it is to get some of these, really cutting edge treatments approved by the FDA. Now, I want to switch gears a little again to diversity. And this really speaks to, and Dr. Carol Watson, who's one of my favorite people, she's in cardiovascular medicine. She's a heart doctor, cardiologist. She was involved in a large study that really sought out to understand differences between women and men. And really looking at that is really critical for the delivery of precision medicine. One of the things that's a well-known fact is that being a member of an ethnic group will increase your risk for genetic diseases. We have heard of sickle cells, anemia, African Americans are at increased risk. Asians are alpha beta thalassemia. And there are many, many others that are much more prevalent among members of a particular ethnic group. Carol participated in an NIH-funded study called MESA, which at the time had enrolled over 6,000 patients across 6 different ethnic communities. But what I'm going to focus on now is the results. In terms of results, really want to focus on the differences between men and women. I don't know how many of you remember or recall this large cohort study called the Framingham Heart Study. And it was done, it was launched in the late 40s, early 50s, in a small town in Massachusetts called Framingham. And, all members of the community were invited to attend. And it's still in existence. So it was a longitudinal study, and it was really focused and designed to ask questions about heart health. And so that particular study, even though they did enroll women, they were outnumbered by men. And at that time, researchers were really, didn't really understand why, that there were differences between men and women that could actually influence health. And so men were often used as the surrogate for illness, disease, wellness. So what a lot of folks started to do starting in the 90s is realize, no, that's not really the case. One of the things that Dr. Carol Watson found was that the effects of stress, anxiety, and depression on the heart, they were significantly worse in women than they are in men. This notion of, take an aspirin a day to prevent heart attack, they realized that really held true for men, but not so much for women. In women, it still was protective, not against heart attack, but against stroke. And then when you're thinking about people that actually are looking for a diagnosis and treatment for a cardiovascular disease, that these treatments were carried out less effectively and diagnostically as well for women than for men. And then lastly, as all of us know, carbs are not our friends, but when it comes to diabetes risk, high carbohydrate intake is still much worse for women than it is for men. So thinking about understanding the differences between men and women biologically is another way that we need to, that we can actually practice precision medicine in a more authentic way. Breast cancer. We know that breast cancer screening, and this is a terrific case for precision health, is once you reach around 45, and I know the guidelines have been changing, all women should get mammograms, right? I was much younger. I remember I had little fibroids when I was in my late teens, early 20s. And so I started having routine mammograms early on. If we ask the question, could young women at risk benefit from early screening? Now, at risk here implies maybe there's a family history. Maybe there was a parent or a grandparent who also had breast cancer. Should we wait until 40 or 45 or whatever the newest guideline is to screen, or should we somehow prospectively evaluate those women? We know that about 20% of breast cancers can be traced to genetic and other factors, 50% to this group of genes we refer to as BRCA, We also know that women with dense breast tissue have a 4 to 6 times greater risk for breast cancer, and drinking and smoking. Those are the lifestyle or environmental factors that can also increase risk. Now, there is research going on, and their thought is that by collecting data on young women with an increased genetic risk, we may be able to start predicting who may need early screening sooner. We've really already talked about, I know we're getting close to time, really talking about racial and ethnic diversity and how critical it is to improving accuracy of genomic testing. Again, we know in the same way that the Framingham Heart Study that men aren't surrogates for cardiovascular health for men and women, and then of course across different racial and ethnic groups. But we also know that there are certain genes, that certain mutations within genes in white Northern Europeans that are considered pathogenic or disease causing. And those same genes or mutations are not considered to be pathogenic in African Americans or in Asians, and vice versa. So sickle cell anemia, a greater prevalence in the African American community. However, our reference standards for genomic testing is all of our reference standards, in the same way that our labs and everything else, they're sort of tailored to, oh, if you're a woman, these are your lab values. If they're men, the values are slightly different. In genetics, it's all of our comparisons are white Northern Europeans. So one of the things we're starting to do at the Institute is trying to gather, and a lot of research groups are doing it as well, really engaging a lot of folks from different racial and ethnic groups in research, so that we can start developing these reference standards for individual communities. So understanding that genetic diversity is going to help us also better gain greater precision with which we start diagnosing, treating, predicting, and preventing illness in different racial and ethnic groups. So where's the promise of precision medicine in improving women's health specifically is really through prevention and treatment. Now, as I've just said, healthcare has been really biased against women until the 90s, when they started to include women more regularly in clinical trials. But there really has been a lot of gender disparity in research, and a lot of health research and intervention research. There are 3 areas where women could feel precision medicines impact the most: cardiovascular health, sexual and reproductive health, the microbiome, which we haven't talked about today, and also in breast cancer. And lastly, the last point I want to make here is that genomic testing is really helping doctors identify a woman's risk of getting cancer, which could prevent any unnecessary treatment. So some people think, I know I have, I think I'm at increased risk, I'm going to have a bilateral mastectomy. That is not always the healthiest thing to do, right? Especially in cases where the likelihood that a woman will actually develop cancer is extremely low. So that is also an area where genomic testing is really helping women to make the right choices for them. The Institute, UCLA Institute for Precision Health, we have really been, in the last 5 years, really pushing the envelope and pushing our institution and our leadership to go faster. And so we established a California Center for Rare Diseases at UCLA that is very much, it's a physical clinics that are focused on patients with rare diseases. And there's also at the same time active research going on. Gene therapy is an example in our Center for Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy, which is part of the California Center for Rare Diseases. There are several gene therapy trials right now that are still in clinical trials that our boys are receiving right now. So that is a truly translational clinic. We've developed a UCLA Center for Smart Health because technology, we're all wearing our smartwatches, our smartphones. all sorts of sensors and wearables that we could use to monitor our health and also integrate that with our health system and our electronic health record. Our Atlas Biobanking and Community Initiative, where we're asking all patients across UCLA Health to share their leftover biospecimens and let us and contribute them to the biobank so that we can start including them in our genetic and genomic research projects. Again, when we think about building a huge biobank of patients, and these are all anonymized, where we're able to connect them to the electronic health record, also anonymized, then we can start, like Amazon and others, identifying patterns. The more we have, the more we can start to understand genetic diversity, the more we can start looking for patterns and starting to make predictions. And lastly, a colleague and I launched one of my proudest moments, a master's program in genetic counseling, rounds out that ecosystem, because you can't communicate scientific information or expect physicians to do that unless they're highly trained. And even those that are the clinical geneticists, you know, that's not their area of strength. And so really ensuring that this communicating genetic information is done in the right way is very important. Not to mention, one of our core values in the School of Medicine, or our pillars, we you know, education, research, patient care, community engagement, service, all of these, the Institute is trying to ensure that we really put points on the board in each of those core areas. So this is my last slide in closing. This is a new revolution in healthcare, where we have medicine today that has been reactive population, more of this one size fits all. And we're really trying to move towards more of this precision health approach or framework that's more predictive, it's more preventive, and it's patient centric. Okay, thank you. That's all I have.